you understand how healing works? By understanding the process, we can not only heal ourselves, but understand why. Welcome to the Healing Power Hour with host Suzanne Hill. In our program, we will show you the healing modalities and approaches that you can use to heal yourself, no matter the illness or the symptoms. Now, here is your host, Suzanne Hill.
Hi, everyone. This is Suzanne Hill, and welcome back to the Healing Power Hour. Thanks for listening. I've got a great show lined up for you today. It's called Demystifying Parasites, How Ozone Therapy Can Help. So we're covering two great topics this hour, parasites and ozone therapy. Even if you think that today's topic may not apply to you, I really want you to stay tuned and hear the show out, because I've discovered that a lot of patients have parasites without knowing about it. And you may not know this, but parasites cause all kinds of lingering health problems that can seem impossible to fully heal if you don't know that parasites are the underlying issue. Once you discover that parasites are at the bottom of everything, if they are, and you treat that, medical problems can vanish rather rapidly. I see this very often in my clinical practice, which is why I wanted to bring it to your attention. And you also want to stay tuned into the show because you're going to be fascinated to learn about ozone therapy, which I know that most of you probably have not heard of before, but I do want you to know about it because once you know about this healing protocol, then it becomes available to you as a resource. And ozone therapy is definitely one healing modality that you want to store in your brain data bank, not only because it's an incredibly powerful mechanism to rid your body of parasites, but ozone therapy can actually help cure all kinds of ailments, and it can literally bring you back from the brink of collapse. And I happen to know this from personal experience. My guest today is Dr. Howard Robbins, New York City's own resident expert in the field of ozone therapy. Dr. Robbins has an office on West 57th Street here in Manhattan, where he administers ozone therapy to his patients, and he's been doing this for over 23 years now, and has been able to help people heal from a whole host of ailments, again, not just parasites. He's very knowledgeable about alternative health solutions, nutrition, and bio-oxidative therapies, of which ozone therapy is clearly one. So Dr. Robbins is going to be joining us at about 20 past the hour, and that's going to be an exciting conversation. Okay, so let's move on now to parasites, a focal point of the show. And listen, just so you know, parasites is a huge topic and there's a lot to cover. So today is really just going to be a rough overview to give you an idea of what's involved. And if there's interest, I can certainly do a whole show that goes into depth on parasites. I just wanted to address this issue even in a cursory way because a lot of people can spend years being sick without realizing that parasites are a factor in their illness. So what's really interesting about parasites is that their existence in your body can show up through a wide range of symptoms. What's amazing to me is that in the United States, doctors today still seem to think that you can only contract parasites if you've recently visited a foreign country. And that is simply not true. Parasites are everywhere, just like bacteria is everywhere. We come into contact with parasites on a regular basis, and your body is always naturally fighting them off. Most people get parasites from the food they eat, not just sushi, which is uncooked fish, but you can get parasites from all kinds of foods, which is why you want to wash your veggies really well and cook your meats thoroughly as well. You can get parasites from someone else who has parasites, which is why you may recall older relatives always telling you as a child not to share food off of other people's plates. So if you are sick or you're around other people who are sick, not just the flu, but also chronic illness, you might want to consider not sharing food with them and sharing off of their plates. Of course, you can also pick up parasites from visiting a foreign country. But what a lot of people don't know is that they can lie dormant in your body for years. And I mean years, until you hit a time period in your life where you're under a lot of stress and your immune system isn't able to fight them off properly anymore. I've had patients have parasites be dormant for 20 years before they surfaced and created problems in the body. What I found in working with patients is that most people with chronic illness, particularly in the digestive arena, but certainly not limited to that, most of those people have a parasite issue that needs to be addressed as part of their healing. The reason why parasites are such an issue is that when they live in your body, they suck out vital nutrients that are supposed to be getting to your cells. That's why some people get confused as to why they're not getting better. They might be eating healthy, nutritious, organic food, but maybe their hair is still brittle, or maybe their skin is still sallow and colorless. That's because the nutrients are primarily going to the parasites living in your intestines, and they're not going to your cells where they're needed. Parasites can reside anywhere in the body, but for the most part, they start out in your intestines. And if you remember back to the colon episode we did a few weeks ago, the potential of parasites is another reason why you really want to keep your colon clean and healthy. Well, the other problem that parasites cause is that when they reside in your body, they release a lot of toxic waste into your body, particularly heavy metals. So between sucking vital nutrients from your system and dumping toxic waste into your system, it's easy to feel horrible when you have parasites inside of you. When these heavy metals accumulate in your body after months or years of hosting parasites, this causes the yeast population in your body to increase because part of yeast function is to surround the heavy metals so that they don't harm your body. Then what can happen is that you get this parasite heavy metal yeast triad going in your body. And that cycle can drive you a little crazy if you're trying to treat it because you feel like you're trying to chase the dragon's tail in healing yourself. You might not know what to conquer first or how. But that parasite heavy metal yeast cycle, it's a conversation I want to save for another day. I did just want to mention it, though, because sometimes parasite issues can get very complicated. And those are precisely the situations in which you're going to want to have assistance from therapies like ozone therapy. Well, in the olden days, the annual visit to your doctor was not just to give you an overall checkup. It was also actually to give you parasite medicine. This was especially true for people who worked on farms or worked with animals. It was common knowledge that parasites were all around. So people used to take antiparasitics at least once a year to clear themselves of worms, amoebas, and protozoa, which are the major classification of parasites. And even though most of us don't work on farms anymore, this is still an excellent measure to take. Anyone who lives with animals, for instance, should absolutely do a yearly parasite cleanse. I think it's interesting that anyone who has a cat or a dog will administer their animal's treatment for worms on a yearly basis, but we often don't think to treat ourselves. So how do you know if you have parasites? Well, the first warning flag you want to pay attention to is if you are dealing with any medical condition that doesn't seem to heal given the standard treatments for that illness. I had a patient, for example, who was recommended to me because she had chronic sinus infections. By the time she came to see me, she was on her 6th round of antibiotics. Each time she would take her meds, her sinus infection would get better, but within a week or two of finishing them, her sinus infection would come back. She'd been to several doctors, and each of them would give her a different antibiotic, or for just a little bit longer, assuming that the prior prescription wasn't the right one or wasn't given enough time for it to do its work. Well, the problem with that approach was that with each successive round of antibiotics, this patient's immune system was getting weaker and weaker, and her sinus problems would rebound even stronger each time. So when she came to me, I decided to test her using kinesiology, which is a type of muscle testing. And the kinesiology showed that she did indeed have parasites lingering in her descending colon. So I put her on herbs to treat her parasites, despite the fact that she didn't even think this was a possibility. But after the 3rd week on her herbs, she passed a huge clump of worms in her bowels, much to her surprise and disgust. But what was great was that after that, her sinuses cleared completely, and she didn't need antibiotics anymore, so she was thrilled. So again, anytime you have recurring health issues that don't get better with standard treatment, you're going to want to look at whether parasites might be at the root of what's going on with you. Another indication that you might have parasites is if you have sudden rapid weight gain or weight loss. I had a patient a few years back, for example, that had precisely that issue. She was a college student, 19 years old, and having continuous and rapid weight fluctuations. She wasn't binging on food, But even with a relatively normal, steady intake of food, she was getting anywhere from 10 to 15-pound weight gains and losses within a matter of days, which is really extreme. Her internist actually thought that she was bulimic and just afraid to tell anybody, but the patient assured me that this was not the case. So again, with testing through kinesiology, we found that her body was harboring parasites in her colon. Once we put her on an herbal protocol to kill the parasites, it took about 6 weeks, but then her unexplained weight fluctuation stopped. Now, in her case, she didn't actually see any parasites passed in her stools, but the fact that the herbal protocol was the only thing that helped her situation, that indicated that she did, in fact, have parasites. Which brings us to the question that patients always ask me, how do I know definitively that I have parasites? Well, as far as Western medicine goes, the standard test for parasites is a stool test. And there are several labs. There's Jetty Cats here in New York City, or Genova Labs and Great Smokies. You can look them up online. Those are in the Midwest. They will test for parasites. And what they do is they send you a kit with instructions, and typically you need to collect 3 consecutive days of stool samples. You send them off to the lab, and then within a week to 2 weeks, they'll let you know if they've detected any parasites in your stool, and if so, what kind of parasite they found. But the problem with this kind of testing is that parasites can very often not show up in a stool test. And insurance companies typically don't cover this kind of testing, so it can be rather expensive to do consecutive tests, which is why I typically skip this part and I go right to treatment if I think that parasites are involved. And if the patient improves, then we know that they've had parasites. If they don't improve, at least these herbal treatments aren't harmful. And lastly, you always want to rule out parasites if you have a wide array of symptoms that have no cohesive thread. I had a patient who was 10 years old who came to me from down south. And this child had severe stomach pain. She had headaches and skin rashes that created intense itching in her elbows and her knees. And she would often wake up in the middle of the night screaming in pain in her stomach. Her mother had taken her to something like 11 different doctors, and nobody seemed to know how to help this child. And her mother was beside herself, so she made the trek to New York City with her daughter to see me. Well, within minutes of examining the girl and looking over her medical history, it was clear to me that she had parasites. The mother was in disbelief and explained to me how clean her household was, and she didn't think it was possible that her child could have contracted parasites. But I said, listen, I know you don't think it's the case, but since you've tried everything else, why don't you just try this? I want you to cut out all sugar from her diet because parasites love sugar. And she did confess that the child had a sweet tooth, and this was 2 weeks before Halloween, so it was a little complicated. But I did tell her to cut out all sugar from her diet, and I put her on an herbal protocol for parasites and told her to keep me posted. I also explained to her that everyone in the family was going to have to be treated for parasites because they're so easily spread among family members. So after she went home, the mother and daughter did as I instructed. The whole family was treated, and within 10 days, the girl started to improve. And because of the slight improvement, they decided to continue with the treatment, even though it was difficult to keep the child off of sugar, and she complained a lot. But within 3 months, the child was absolutely fine. So again, when you have a medical history that shows a whole wide array of symptoms, you do want to, that don't make any sense cohesively, you do want to rule out parasite cleanses, rule out parasites, and maybe do a parasite cleanse prophylactically and see if that helps. So I've given you a couple of different patient case studies because I want to give you an idea of how parasites can manifest differently as a health issue. But I also want to give you listeners a list of things to look for if you're wondering whether or not they're a factor for you. So you want to consider parasites to be a factor if you have one or more of the following. If you have any kind of irregular bowel issue, if you have loose, watery stools or constipation, if you have abdominal bloating and tenderness, or if you have excessive gas or intestinal discomfort. You also want to consider parasites if you have any kind of hair or skin issues. Maybe you have hair loss or you have coarse, brittle hair that looks like it's depleted of nutrients. Maybe you have skin rashes that come and go randomly, or even seem to be located primarily around one or more joints. And you also want to consider parasites if you have a skin condition that's so severe that no dermatologist has been able to help you. Often the root of that is parasites. You also want to consider parasites if you have any kind of migratory joint or muscle pain, or if you have one particular joint that swells up out of the blue. Dr. Hulda Clark was a parasite expert, and she was convinced, for example, that all arthritis had a parasitic component. And that's debatable, but certainly if you have severe arthritis, doing a parasite cleanse is something you might want to consider. You want to consider parasites if you have severe headaches and migraines, or tightness of the jaw and grinding of the teeth at night. And as mentioned earlier in the program, you want to consider parasites if you have any unexplained weight fluctuations, and also if you have extreme sugar cravings, especially if historically it's not in your personality to crave sugar. And lastly, if you notice anything that looks like white rice in your stool, this is actually larvae in your stool, and this is a clear indication of parasites. So hopefully you're listening to this and also wondering, if you've been listening to my radio shows, you're going to also wonder what is the energetic pattern underlying parasites. I'm hoping that these shows are inspiring you to always look at illness through that filter of energy. Well, parasites are creatures that survive by feeding off of a host. So people who can't seem to get rid of parasites are typically those people who let way too many people feed off of their energy. Now, I'm not saying that if you let people feed off your energy that you'll definitely contract parasites, because that's not true. But what I am saying is that if you have parasites that don't seem to want to leave your body, then you're going to want to look at how many people you let feed off of your energy, particularly those people who should be finding their own energy source somewhere else. And you're going to want to start shifting that pattern of giving your energy away too freely. One thing I want you to keep in mind also is that worms in particular do have a tendency to hatch on the full moon. So very often people who have a parasitic worm infestation will notice, if they chart their symptoms, that their symptoms will get worse at or around the full moon. So you want to make sure that at least that you're treating them at the time of the full moon. And as I said earlier, parasites do love sugar, so you're going to want to eliminate all sugar sources from your diet. On the flip side, parasites do not like oxygen, which is why oxidative therapies like ozone will help. Now, there are a whole host of antiparasitics out there in the market, and I don't have the time to go over them in detail because we need to go to break, but I will post them on my Healing Power Hour fan page on Facebook, or I'll get my assistant to do it. But there are so many herbal parasitics out there, antiparasitics on the market, that I wanted to whittle it down to 4, and I'll just list them quickly here. One is humaworm, which makes both adult and child strengths. The second one I like is Amish dewormer. You can find that online. The third one is a product called WW, made by Pure Herbs, and this is a good one to treat children with because you can put it on topically. And the last one is a product called Parasite Eliminator, made by Bob Dagger of New York City. He has a store downtown called High Vibe, but you can also get his products online at www.highvibe.com. And so those are my herbal protocols, the recommendations that I have. We're going to go to break, and when we come back, we're going to go back to Dr. Howard Robbins, who will be joining us to talk about ozone therapy. Thanks for listening. Hi, welcome back. This is Suzanne Hill. I'm here with Dr. Howard Robbins, ozone therapy expert. Dr. Robbins, thanks for joining us.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, you may not remember, but I met you in 2009, about 3.5 years ago, and I came to you because not only did I have parasites, but I also was diagnosed with lupus. And you assured me that absolutely ozone therapy could help. And I did it for several months in conjunction with a lot of other things. And I don't know if we ever had this conversation, but I was healed of lupus, so I wanted to say thank you very much.
That's great. I'm really glad to hear that. The truth of the matter is we actually just started having patients write down these kind of things, so I have it for when we actually do write a book on the whole subject, and we can put down patient testimonials and give them numbers and everything else. That's what ozone does. And when all hope is given up, and in fact, you just pointed out, lupus is a particular immune system, autoimmune disease that nobody has a fix for, and ozone has been known to fix it over and over and over again.
So can you give to our listeners, and many of them don't know what ozone therapy is, can you give us a basic background on what it is and how it works?
Very simply, ozone is a gas. Ozone is a gas. It's not a liquid. What we inject into the body is a mixture of medical-grade oxygen, O2, and medical-grade ozone, O3, directly into the veins. And when it goes into the body, it destroys every virus, every fungus, every yeast, every mold, every toxin, every harmful free radical, and in fact chelates out toxic metals off nerve tissue, which no other form of chelation therapy can do, and that's where toxic metals do all their damage. It has other many beneficial effects, but this is what it does when it goes in the body, and it does it in a very simple way for the scientists that are out there. It's electron deficient. So it steals an electron from another molecule that can't defend itself against it, like a bacteria or a virus, and thus it destroys the bacteria or the virus. For harmful free radicals, for example, like carbon monoxide, it'll combine with carbon by latching onto it, and it becomes carbon dioxide, which you can breathe out, where carbon monoxide, which we're breathing in when we drive cars or walk near a bus all the time, can cause us damage.
Sure.
So, and it does this, interestingly enough, with virtually no adverse reactions whatsoever, which is kind of weird and amazing, considering most medicine comes with horrible adverse reactions when it's very potent. In fact, one German study done in 1982 by a man by the name of Jacobs studied 600 some odd therapists who had done, ready for this number, 5.5 million treatments over a 2-year period on just under 400,000 patients.
Wow.
And the adverse reaction rate was 0.00007. That's 4 zeros and a 7. That's unbelievable, because to have that low, I mean, breathing the air you're breathing, the listeners are breathing right now, and drinking a glass of water, even purified water after this show, is going to be more dangerous than ozone therapy is when done correctly by trained professionals. This is not something for people to try on themselves at home just because they're able to get hold of a machine and do it. It's meant for medical professionals to do in a professional setting correctly. And when done correctly, it's safer than drinking purified water, and you get amazing results.
Well, how long have you been doing this therapy? And how did you get introduced to this therapy?
Oh my God, we've been doing this. I just started in January. This month, my 23rd year. And the way I got introduced to this was kind of interesting. First, a man by the name of Ed McCabe wrote a book about it because he had been searching for an answer to his health care problems, and he had gone to Europe and found out that it had been used all over Europe now for about 70 years by over 45,000 physicians daily in clinics and hospitals all around the world. And he found out it existed, and it had been used here actually prior to 1940 quite extensively. And that's when the drug companies took over. Well, in any case, he wrote a book on it and got on a friend of mine by the name of Gary Knoll, his radio show, his health show, and Gary introduced it to me. At the same time, a close friend of mine, Dr. Robert Atkins, the diet doctor who passed away, Bob wanted me to start doing it because he began doing it. And fortunately, New York State found out, or that didn't find out I did it at that time, but they found out he did it. And they took away his license, which instituted a 3-year court battle to to get his license back, which he won in Supreme Court in New York, and his decision was upheld in appeals. So he won the right for all the doctors in New York State to do ozone therapy legally. And it's the only state where it's been tested in court and where it's truly legal to do ozone therapy. There's a bunch of other states, mostly west of the Mississippi, where it's done without any problems from the government, but the state governments. But it's not technically legal because it hasn't been tested in court that way.
So it's used extensively in Europe, you're saying? It has been for much longer?
Not just used in Europe, but, for example, in Germany, it's mandated by law to give it to a patient pre- and post-op to prevent an infection. In this country, we use antibiotics. There, they use ozone. So it's mandated by law. In fact, it's considered medical negligence, what we call malpractice here. If a person has an infection, a bacterial infection, and they don't offer it as a choice between antibiotics and giving them that choice of ozone, that can be considered medical negligence there. In fact, there's been hundreds upon hundreds, not a few dozen, but hundreds upon hundreds of research, double-blind studies and other research studies on the use of medical ozone as a medicine, done in Germany, in Russia, in Poland, in Italy, in Cuba, just to name some of the countries where it's been extensively researched for the last 50, 60, 70 years. It's pretty amazing. There isn't any other medicine that you'll ever look up in a physician's desk reference or ask any doctor about that has more than a handful of studies on it, except perhaps some of these new statin drugs might have several dozen studies done on its benefit. Truth is, there is no medicine that has been so studied and so extensively showing all the wonderful things that it can do for so many diseases throughout the body.
So if that's the case, then why is it not more widely known about and used here in the United States?
Well, there's a two-part answer to that. The first part is doctors have to know it exists. I went to school. I was an alternative doctor for many years. I graduated, started practice in 1973. I became an alternative doctor in 1978. I didn't even hear about it until 1989. I had no idea that it existed. So why don't we know is because research articles don't get published here because people aren't doing research on it here. Some of it has to do with the legality of trying to use it, and some of it has to do with knowing that it exists and as an avenue of research that you might want to go down. We've been doing research for we're in our 23rd year now researching its benefits. As part of 29 studies that I do on every patient that comes in. They qualify, we sign, as you did, you sign into a study, and now I have my way of protecting myself from the state beyond every other way of protecting yourself. But the truth of the matter is, that's part A. But part B, the real reason it's being suppressed in this country, I'm sure it's going to be very hard for the listeners to believe, but I always say, follow the money trail. Big Pharma can't market this product because it's not patentable. It's made from a machine as you need it at that time. Since it's not a patentable product, they can't make any money from it, and they've done everything they can to suppress it. Think about it. Over $250 billion was spent last year on antibiotics. What if ozone cut out the need for half of it?
Well,
There's nothing that gets rid of viruses in the body. If a person has herpes, they're stuck with it, and they believe commercials that you see on television saying that you can't get rid of it. Well, that's not true. Ozone gets rid of herpes all the time. Okay, but
so you're telling me that you've been able to get rid of herpes virus, herpes 1 and herpes 2? You've cleared that in patients?
I have seen ozone get rid of all forms of herpes infections, not just ozone 1, herpes 1 and herpes 2, but herpes zoster, which is the shingles virus, causes shingles in people when you get it again. It's chicken pox when you're a child and shingles when you become an adult, and even younger adults are getting it right now due to stress and weakened immune systems. ozone not only gets rid of shingles, but it also gets rid of post-herpetic pain. You know, that burning pain that people can have for days, weeks, or months, or even years after the shingles outbreak has flared down. So ozone destroys all those viruses. Ozone has extensively been used to treat AIDS patients. Ozone gets rid of all the viruses, including the HIV virus, and it's been doing that consistently for years. And I'll give you one interesting little aside. Dr. John Pittman, an MD from North Carolina, appeared with that man, Ed McCabe, that man who wrote the book Reintroducing It, in a federal hearing in 1988 at a Senate hearing on AIDS. He brought in 3 of his patients who had been seroconverted. Now, sero means, that's spelled S-C-R-O, where you convert somebody's blood from HIV positive to HIV negative. So he brought in 3 patients with all their personal testimony, with all their lab reports and all his office notes, and after the Senate hearing, the result was, we see no reason to pursue this any further. So why would the government, why would senators want to not pursue something that might be the way to treat all AIDS patients and save their lives? And the answer is, follow the money trail. Who do you think funds a lot of their campaigns? The big pharma, the big drug companies, through lobbying and whatnot, send in money to them so they can afford their re-election campaigns and election campaigns. They've got to take care of the people that they know. Now, I'll go one step farther. There's a condition called reflex sympathetic dystrophy, RSD. It's also called chronic regional pain syndrome, CRPS. For those of you that don't know what that is, you get an injury or you have a surgery done, and instead of healing, that part of your body becomes severely painful, burningly painful, actually. And that burning pain can spread through a whole limb, for example, or from head to toe. And the kind of burning pain we're talking about is take this as a thought. Everybody has probably had brain freeze from eating ice cream or ices one time in life, and it lasts for, a few seconds or a minute at most. How about you wake up every day and you get a burning pain, a headache pain like that, brain freeze, that lasts for several hours, and there's nothing that can stop it. These people there's over 3 million Americans that suffer from this right now, or close to 3 million. I think it's 2.5 or 2.7 million Americans suffer from this, with more happening each day. It rarely goes away, and they have no treatment for it whatsoever except the symptoms. They give you narcotic painkillers and medications to reduce nerve inflammation. They have no answer for it. Well, by chance, we started treating somebody with this. Problem, and because of a radio show that I did, and a second patient with this RSD, and the second patient came in with it, and she actually was an RN who had been working in a pain clinic. They both had foot surgery performed, and they both developed RSD that went from head to toe. And it comes with fatigue and a lot of other horrible symptoms. Well, in any case, after just a few treatments, we started turning them around. Now, I have to say, we never really got rid of it completely in them. But what we did was... But you
improved it, right. You improved their quality of life.
Dramatically. They were able to go back to living a normal life again. They had Mother's Days, and they had Christmases again. It was a normal life again, and they reduced their pain medication down to, instead of multiple medicines, only 1 or 2 medicines, and they didn't always have to take them every day. Now, I wanted to publish an article on it, so I wrote up a medical paper about these 2 cases with 23 medical references as well, and I tried to get it published. It was rejected by every journal I sent it to.
I can believe that.
Because the journals are funded by the drug companies who have drug ads in there, and I want to send my kids to college too, which they're already graduated. But you want to send your kids to college, you're not going to cut off the funding that you get from drug companies, because now there's something that's an alternative to Lyrica and painkillers and stuff like that they're trying to promote in these medical journals.
Understood.
So that's why doctors don't know about it in this country, and that's why people haven't heard about it. But it's been out there. And here's another interesting aside for those people that want to find out more about this, because in this show, there's only so much time we have to really talk about it. Most of the time, people will ask, and doctors will ask, show me some medical research. Well, here's
we're going to want to know.
All you need to do is go to our National Library of Medicine. The National Library of Medicine, you probably know, but listeners may not, is pubmed.gov. That's P as in Peter, U, B as in boy, M as in Mary, E, D as in dog, .gov for government, pubmed.gov. And in search, you type in intravenous ozone therapy. And you're going to come up with about 70 to 80 articles, most of them very current articles, from research articles done by doctors and hospitals around the world, attesting to all the different areas that ozone has been shown to help and how safe it is. Pretty amazing.
Amazing.
That you can get that without any problem at all that quickly. Not to mention dozens of websites like ozoneuniversity.com, ozoneuniversity.com, that talk about it and give you quite a bit more information about it.
Okay, well, we're going to have to go to break now. This is really interesting. When we come back, I do want to go into specific case studies that you've done just to give people a flavor of how it might help them with their illness. But thank you. We're listening to Dr. Robbins talk about ozone therapy, and when we come back from break, we'll pursue this further. Thank you. Hi, it's Suzanne Hill. I'm here with Dr. Howard Robbins, an expert on ozone therapy. And welcome back, Dr. Robbins.
Oh, thanks again for having me.
What I wanted to address, I mentioned before we went to break, is if you could just give listeners a couple of examples of some cases that you've healed. You know, you talked about the repetitive RSD, you called it, and HIV. What about more common sort of everyday ailments that people have?
Well, just to reiterate, herpes infections today are probably the worst psychosocial illness anyone can have. I think people would rather have leprosy than have herpes. When I was a kid, it wasn't that big a deal if you had a cold sore on your lip. Today, it's devastating, and in the dating world, it's a very, very serious thing. But more importantly, we now know that genital herpes can cause deformities, blindness in babies when they exit the birth canal and things like that. So that's a pretty serious thing. In fact, if we just stay down below there, HPV, human papillomavirus, is a very serious thing, and they don't have great answers to that. Ozone therapy has been consistently able to get rid of it, and as pretty much any other infection down there.
So when people have HPV, when you treat people for HPV, you're able to get them to a clear pap smear?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty incredible.
And consistently. When I say consistently means no doctor should, and I think it's immoral and unethical for a doctor to make a promise or a guarantee to results, and I don't think a doctor should ever use the C word, cure, because even if you've been successful 1,000 times in a row, you never know if you're going to fail on number 1,001 for some crazy reason. So
sure.
I don't use those words. But when I say consistently and I say gets rid of or fixes, I'm basically using the things that I don't want to actually come right out and say because we haven't failed yet. If you stay with ozone therapy the way we do it long enough, it does just what people are looking for. My patients don't come to me wanting to get better. They're coming here to get rid of something once and for all and go on living their life the way they want to live their life. Now, it helps all sorts of skin problems because that's one of its benefits. In fact, let me tell you some of the side effects. The side effects of ozone therapy are hair and nails grow longer, stronger, healthier, and faster. Skin takes on a healthier look. People fall asleep easier, sleep better, have more, need less sleep, and have more energy all day long. Athletes get great workouts right afterwards because it helps the mitochondria, which are the oxygen utilization organelles that are in our cells, work in the Krebs cycle better to make energy better. So it improves circulation as well. That's why it helps get rid of diabetic neuropathy and diabetic gangrenous ulcers, which we've been able to fix consistently every time and save limbs and toes and feet and legs from being amputated.
I know that when I had the treatment, the first thing I noticed is that absolutely I slept better, and number two, I had way more energy. With the lupus, I was exhausted all the time, and it didn't take more than 3 treatments for me to start feeling better. How often can you walk? I know how it's done, but Dr. Robbins, can you walk people through what happens when they come in for treatment?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, first thing happens when they come in, we have a consultation, and I get down all their current health problems and all their current symptoms. Then they sit back, and by the time I'm done giving them a little talk like we've done here on the show, they pretty much, I've answered all the questions they think they were going to ask me and all the questions they should have thought to ask me that they didn't think to ask me. So I make sure my patients are fully informed. Then if they're ready to begin, we qualify, they sign into a study just like you did, and they get their first treatment, which is a very, in the ozone world, large dose, but to me a small dose. I always push the envelope, which is why I get the results that I get. And they get their first treatment, which takes about 1 minute. Then each time they come in, they're going to get a little bit more ozone each time because we've learned by modulating the dosage that way, we don't have major kill-off reactions, and they don't get hammered or hit hard by the kill-off reactions that you can get from other therapies. And by the way, something you pointed out earlier is very important. It's very important and valuable for people to do other alternative things, changing their diets to healthy diets, taking vitamins and minerals and other supplements, herbs. And the good news is ozone works compatibly with all nutraceuticals and, for that matter, with all pharmaceuticals. There's no negative interactions there. So you can pretty much do all the natural healthy things that you want to do, and you can add on to the care and get well faster by adding on acupuncture and green juices and meditation and all the positive things, yoga, anything positive that you can do that would help your body grow healthier faster. It works very compatibly with ozone therapy. And now we've done over 180,000 treatments in the last 22 years. And we've only had 2 adverse reactions ever. And that's a concern for every patient. After 30 to 40 some treatments, not right away, obviously, 2 patients developed a temporary rash that we believed was not a purging of something from their body, but an allergy to ozone, so we stopped giving it to them because within 30 minutes of the therapy, 2 visits in a row. Having said that, and I pointed out earlier the low adverse reaction rate around the world from that Otis Jacobs study, that's typical to ozone, an extremely potent medicine. I mean, where can a doctor come on a radio show and say, we have seen and gotten rid of MS, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, we have gotten rid of Lyme disease, even when it's stage 4 Lyme, neurologic Lyme, affecting their ability to walk and do things and even think for that matter. Candidiasis, chronic fatigue syndrome. Okay? Lately there's been this thing, and I wrote an article on it called I call the article I Can't Stop Coughing, but basically I call it Hurricane Sandy cough. And then there's this other cough that seems like a chronic bronchitis and cough that's actually been written about. It's not a flu. Ozone gets rid of the flu, by the way, consistently, every form of flu virus, because you can't fight it. Well, Hurricane Sandy cough was caused by all the mold spores that were released from the mold that was created.
Oh, right.
And if you remediate your own basement or apartment, it happened when people put all this moldy junk out for the garbage man to take away, got blown into the air, and people inhaled these mold spores, and they don't have an answer for killing off mold, yeast, and fungal infections in our lungs. Ozone consistently can fix that kind of problem. We've seen that happen. This chronic bronchitis with this cough that just doesn't want to go away, and when you think it's gone, it comes back with a vengeance. Ozone gets rid of that. And if you think you're getting sick and you get an ozone therapy the day you think you're coming down with something, you probably won't come down with it. That's pretty amazing. Now, if you do get sick and you get ozone therapy, you may have to get it every day, 5 or 6 days in the week, but you'll be able to go to work, function, live your life, and do all the things you need to do. So it takes that edge off of the illness while your body heals. And the key is to cleanse and detoxify our bodies, boost our immune systems up so we don't become ill at all.
Now, I remember when I was going for therapy, it took about, in and out of your office was about 15 minutes. Only 5 minutes was actually sitting in the chair, I think. How often do people come for this therapy? How many times a week? And then how many months, or even if longer than that, do they need to come?
Well, for most conditions and diseases, particularly people that come to me have had them for years, so they've given up hope almost. Mm-hmm. You can do it the slow way or you can go the fast track. The slow way is 3 or 4 treatments per week. And as you said, the treatment's only a few minutes long, the 10 minutes of recovery while the ozone is directly working, though it has stimulated other immune products in your body to be made that work for several hours more, which is why it's so effective. And then you're in and out, generally in my office, within 30 minutes. No hour-and-a-half waits like a typical Manhattan doctor. On the other hand, you can go the fast track, where you can actually get 2 treatments per day with a minimum of a 3-hour separation between treatments for your body to clean out the waste. And you can do up, since we're open 6 days a week, because you always need a day off from ozone to let your body clean out all the waste that's been created. You can do 10 to 12 treatments per week and do the fast track. So what normally might take a year, months or a year or longer to get rid of something, you can now do in weeks.
Wow.
And see results very rapidly. The results on the fast track are seen within a week or two. The slower way, it may take 4 to 6 to 8 weeks for people to notice significant benefits. That will be all the encouragement you need to stay with it as long as it's going to take to get you well. The problem is there's no honest way to say how many treatments each person is going to need for any problem, because ozone is not a guided missile. It's not a smart bomb. It doesn't just go after the one virus you want to get rid of or the one bacteria you want to eliminate. It's going to
go after them all, yeah.
Out, which is a good thing, but it can take time that way. Now, if you're coming in on the fast track, what I always call kill, you don't give viruses, fungus, yeast, and molds a chance to regrow themselves, duplicate themselves. So you're taking giant steps forward every day rather than a giant step forward and a baby step back on a day off.
Right,
and that's why we can, in the end, you need total fewer treatments, and you can get rid of things very rapidly. And we have been the leader in intravenous ozone therapy, certainly here in North America, and one of the top leaders in the world, which is why I'm now lecturing everywhere and in and around the world on ozone, because we have researched it and developed protocols that are unique in the ozone world. That means that unless you're using what people are starting to call the Robbins protocols, you may not get as potent or the same results that I've been talking about. You'll get better.
But you won't get the same results as with the Robbins protocol. Okay, that's good to know.
They're really that unique now.
Now, we're going to have to close soon, but I want to ask one last question for listeners. Does medical insurance ever cover ozone therapy?
Oh, all right. The answer is, first, consider that ozone therapy in this country is considered an alternative medicine, and most insurance companies do not want to even pay for traditional medicine. Go try to get an MRI approved today sometimes. It's like fighting for your life to get it.
So the answer is pretty much no, but I do know that some patients get it covered in their flexible spending account. So for any listeners who have that, that's one thing to cover, to think about.
Sure. Oh, sure. And United Healthcare and Oxford Healthcare have been paying consistently for for many years.
Oh, okay,
And
that's
other
good to know.
insurance companies pay inconsistently. It's usually the small companies that you never heard the names of that are paying these days.
Those pay these days. I'm sorry, we're going to have to close and we have to finish the show, but thank you so much, everyone. This is Dr. Howard Robbins of New York City, an expert on ozone therapy. Thank you so much for sharing your information and knowledge with us. And to my listeners...
If anybody needs me, they can get me at 212-581-0101.
Oh, yes.
That's 212-581-0101. I'd be happy to answer their questions.
Yes,
Thank
and
you
I'm going
for
to put your
having me.
information on my website, too. Okay, thank you, everybody, for listening. Again, please make use of what you've learned today. Share it with whoever you can, and much love to you all.
Thank you so much for joining us this week. Please join Suzanne Hill for another edition of the Healing Power Hour next Wednesday at 11 a.m. in the West, 2 p.m. in the East on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. Have a healthy week.